Hi, everybody, and welcome back. In this session, we are going to talk about two major theorists of structuralism, Mikhail Bakhtin and Roland Barthes. Remember, Roland Barthes is actually a bridge between structuralism and post structuralism, and he has done a lot of his work which belongs to the post structuralist phase. In this session, we are only going to talk about his structuralist phase. Let's begin. First, Mikhail Bakhtin. Bakhtin was born in 1895 and he died in 1975. He was a prominent Russian philosopher, literary critic. He was a semiotician. He influenced the field of literary theory a lot with his work. And not just literary theory, cultural studies also very much. Bakhtin's work centers on the study of language, communication and culture with a particular focus on the nature of dialogic interaction in literature and society. He focused upon dialogism, dialogue a lot, and most of his work centers around that. Dialogic interaction kaisa hai in literature and society. The first key concept that we talk about is dialogism. So it is one of Bakhtin's central ideas, dialogism, and it refers to the notion that all communication and discourse are inherently dialogical. कहते हैं कि जितना भी whatever there is in this world, all kinds of communication, of course there is dialogue, right? Whenever you go out, talk to somebody, there is a dialogue, and that's what he focuses upon. He wants to analyze everything with that. According to Bakhtin, every utterance is a response to and influenced by prior discourse. अब आप कहोगे कि there can be monologues also. Of course there can be monologues, but that monologue will also be inspired by a prior discourse or something that the speaker focuses upon while speaking. And it opens the door for further responses. For example, I am speaking right now. It's only me speaking. I am giving a monologue. But it is influenced by something, and it will open doors to further responses. You as listeners might think about all the things that we are studying right now, and it will open doors for further responses that you will give, and it will create an ongoing dialogue. So it is not necessary that right now only I am speaking and you have to speak and that's what forms a dialogue. No, it can be an ongoing kind of a dialogue. Okay, so according to Bakhtin, dialogue is a very inherent feature of language, and it always implies a relationship. In any kind of a conversation, the speakers are different from each other. But what is interesting is that these differences that are there in speakers, they are retained in the conversation. Let's take an example of novels, and that's what Bakhtin does. In a novel, there are so many various characters who belong to various, let's say, castes, class, but they speak their mind, and there are differences. And the beauty of a dialogue is that the differences are retained in the conversation. They are held in place in the relation in which is a dialogue. Next, he talks about heteroglossia. Now, what does heteroglossia mean? Heteroglossia, multiple levels of speech, multiple levels of language, or polyphony. Bakhtin explored the diversity of language and speech in social life, proposing the concept of heteroglossia. Heteroglossia refers to the coexistence of multiple voices, style, and languages within a culture or society that we just talked about. Dialogue opens a space up for multiple voices, and that's heteroglossia. Heteroglossia क्या है? Coexistence of multiple voices or style or languages एक culture में, एक society में. This multiplicity of voices enriches communication and reflects the dynamic nature of language. Again, Bakhtin takes an example. The prime example that Bakhtin takes is a novel, and he says that in a novel you will find multiple voices, multiple characters are there, and they have multiple voices. Heteroglossia refers to that coexistence of multiple voices. It's not necessary, बहुत सारे texts ऐसे होते हैं in which the entire narrative is not controlled by the author or it's the protagonist. There are so many different characters and each has a different voice. That's heteroglossia. And he goes on to say, Bakhtin goes on to say that, a novel is a space wherein it gives rise to more spaces, more languages, more intertextuality. That's the term you must have all heard, intertextuality. So this is the feature that Bakhtin was particularly very fond of in a novel, how a novel refers to other works, other discourses. And later on, so many other theorists have worked upon intertextuality. For example, Julia Kristeva. She has built upon this notion of intertextuality. And Bakhtin was also very fond of intertextuality. So it gives space to the other, the different. And that's the beauty of it, heteroglossia. Then we have chronotope. Chronotope is made up of two terms, chrono and tope. Chrono means time and topos means space. So chronotope actually refers to, again, the connection between time and space. How Bakhtin says that how time and space are very fluid. You must have seen so many science fictions, जिसमें you will see that they refer to multiple zones, multiple time spaces. होते हैं ना ऐसे बहुत सारे works जिसमें एक world चल रहा है और parallel world एक और चल रहा है, time and space. So that connection between time and space is what is chronotope. And Bakhtin shows that, how time and space are both fluid. And in fact, every age, he says, every age has a very different notion of time and space. Because every time, there are new inventions. And he says that, अगर हम 20th century की बात करें, after the development of Einsteinian science and all the developments that took place in physics also, we have a different sense of time and space. So chronotopes in science fiction today, they suggest multiple worlds, whose multiple zones are also multiple. And there are so many examples. You can take examples of magic realism. You must have read some works, magic realism wale genre. So, they generate chronotopes. Those magic realism, they generate chronotopes that are about multiple time, space coexisting next to each other. Sometimes you have some works which, जैसे famished road है. अगर आपने नहीं पढ़ा है, we'll talk about it later. But Ben Okri wrote a work called The Famished Road. Now, it does not allow us to know with certainty whether the world that is depicted in that particular work is real or it is in imagination. So how time and space becomes very fluid. Another very good example is the call centers, जो कि मल्टीपल टाइम स्पेसेस में काम करते हैं. इंडिया में बहुत सारे ऐसे कॉल सेंटर्स हैं who work according to the time zone of a different country. So that's also an example. Carnival and Carnivalesque, next concept. Bakhtin introduced the idea of Carnival and Carnivalesque in his analysis of literary works and cultural practices. अब carnival क्या होता है? Have you been to a carnival? It's a festival, right? Carnival is such a space where all kinds of differences are not there. Everyone is allowed in a carnival, right? From a rich person to a poor person, nobody asks you what is your class, what is your status in the society. You go there. And particularly Bakhtin goes back to medieval times and he talks about those carnivals and the kind of festives that used to take place in that time. जैसे कि I don't know if you've been to a carnival, you must have seen कि वहाँ पे बहुत सारे plays भी होते हैं, है ना? तो stage पे बहुत सारे plays होते हैं, कोई just for entertainment. There are so many things. Folk dances are there, folk stories are presented like that. तो वहाँ से ही this concept actually comes. The carnival actually represents a festive, often subversive and communal event where hierarchies are temporarily overturned and the social norms are playfully challenged. So many times, if we take an example of a what play, let's say, okay, and in that play, let's assume that there are some characters who are very jokingly making or commenting on the society, the upper section of the society, upper caste people, and mocking that particular section of a people. Is anybody going to come and stop them from doing that? Because they're just jokingly doing it. And that's the space where these hierarchies are playfully challenged and overturned. So carnivalesque can be seen in literature also and art that incorporates these elements of the carnival. And what are these elements of the carnival? Laughter, satire, mock. All of these things we find in literature. We find in so many works. So those are the works that Bakhtin was actually interested in. Those who subvert or overturn these hierarchies. Even bodily functions, are a part of carnival because they do not find expression in official culture. Laughter is not sanctioned by government or by institution, but nobody even is going to come and question you for it. We have these days stand-up comedians also, although sometimes they are questioned, but many a times if very smartly they do it, then that also becomes a space of carnival, right? Again, we have so many examples. For example, Salman Rushdie's writing. We can see instances of carnival in the writings of Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children. Salim, अगर आपने पढ़ा है तो उसमें सलीम जो है, he believes that the Indo-Pakistan war of 1965, it happened because he imagined it. So इतने बड़े event को he has turned it into a mere imagination. So here Rushdie is reducing a massive event into a single individual's fantasy. Fantasy को भी वो एक, that also becomes a space for carnival. Again, we have Margaret Atwood's works and The Edible Woman. That also we have some instances of carnival. So this is about Bakhtin and his key concepts. And the concept of carnival was introduced by Bakhtin in the book Rabelais and His World. This has been asked in the exam so many times. Bakhtin examines the carnivalesque aspects of, so he was actually reading Rabelais's works, and particularly his series of novels which is known as Gargantua and Pantagruel. And here is where he actually talks about this carnival. We have some major works that you must know about of Bakhtin. First is the Dialogic Imagination. I have not written them down chronologically. If you are making notes, I would suggest that you write them down chronologically. 1975, this collection of essays by Bakhtin, posthumously published, is a seminal work on his theories of dialogism, heteroglossia and the carnivalesque. So we have essays in this which talk about all of these things. It includes influential essays by on Dostoevsky. See, Dostoevsky's works, Bakhtin has taken examples of Dostoevsky's works a lot. And he has written a work, Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics. So it includes influential essays on Dostoevsky, Rabelais, and the theory of the novel. Next work is Rabelais and His World, 1965, that we just saw. He examines the works of Francois Rabelais, a French Renaissance writer, and discusses the carnivalesque elements in his literature, Rabelais's literature, and their significance in the context of medieval and Renaissance culture. Then we have Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, 1929, published in 1963. This early work by Bakhtin explores the Russian novelist Dostoevsky's unique literary style and his contribution to the development of modern novel. Next, we have Discourse in the novel, 1935. This early essay laid the foundation for Bakhtin's dialogical theory. यहाँ पे foundation ले किया इन्होंने अपने dialogism वाला theory के लिए. and discussed the concept of heteroglossia also, the coexistence of multiple voices and languages in novels. And last we have Towards a Philosophy of the Act, 1993. It is a co-authored work with Vadim Lyapunov, discusses the relationship between language and consciousness and the philosophy of the act as a foundational concept for Bakhtin's ideas. This is about Bakhtin. Let's give a quick look again. Dialogism, Heteroglossia, Chronotope, Carnival, and then the major works: Dialogic Imagination, Rabelais and His World, Problems of Dostoevsky's Poetics, Discourse in the Novel, and Toward a Philosophy of the Act. So I hope this much is clear. Next we move on to Roland Barthes. Again I'm repeating. In this session we are only talking about the structuralist phase of Roland Barthes. Barthes was born in 1915 and he died in 1980. He was a French literary theorist, he was a philosopher and semiotician. He made significant contributions to various fields, literary criticism and cultural studies and semiotics. So he is also an influential figure in cultural studies. Barthes' work was influential in challenging traditional approaches to literature and culture, and is considered one of the key figures of post-structuralism and post-modernism, because the major works, major concepts that we usually talk about Barthes is in the post-structuralist or post-modern phase. However, Roland Barthes is actually a bridge between structuralism and post-structuralism, a very important theorist. Now, during his structuralist phase, Barthes was influenced by the works of the linguist Ferdinand de Saussure that we've already talked about, and another person that we have not talked about yet, Claude Lévi-Strauss, an anthropologist. So who was Claude Lévi-Strauss? Claude Lévi-Strauss was an anthropologist. He took inspiration from Saussure's works, ideas, and he applied it to anthropology. And he looked at the different myths with the works, with the concepts of Saussure's structuralism. And therefore, he developed the field of structural anthropology. Remember, Claude Lévi-Strauss. Myths को analyze किया. Oedipus myths को पूरा इन्होंने analyze किया है with the help of structuralism. So they were the key figures in the development of structuralism. Structuralism sought to analyze cultural phenomena by examining the underlying structures and systems that shape them. Barthes' early works, we have Writing Degree Zero and Mythologies, very, very important works. He applied structuralist methods to literature and popular culture. In both of these works, he has applied structuralist methods to literature and popular culture. See, I am not going to mention all the works of Barthes in this session again, because once we complete Barthes, only then I'll be mentioning all his works. So he explored how language and cultural myths are structured and how they influence the way people perceive the world. कि लैंग्वेज और कल्चरल जो मिथ्स हैं वो कैसे किस तरह से सोसाइटी में स्ट्रक्चर किए गए हैं और लोग कैसे उन चीज़ों से इन्फ्लुएंस हो जाते हैं. हाउ डू पीपल परसीव दोज थिंग्स एंड हाउ डू पीपल लुक एट दोज थिंग्स. फॉर एग्जाम्पल माइथोलॉजीज में वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, ही एनालाइज्ड वेरियस एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ एवरीडे लाइफ like advertisements. This was a question also. Advertisement, fashion and wrestling. He actually talks about wrestling and boxing. He talks about steak. He actually says कि wrestling और boxing में major differences क्या हैं. So he analyzes these aspects of everyday life to uncover the ideological myths embedded in these seemingly mundane objects and practices. They are very, they are very mundane things, practices. So he wanted to uncover the ideological myths which are embedded in these very mundane things of life. Very important works: Structural Analysis of Narrative, 1977, and Scherzer, 1970. In these works, he has developed a model of narrative. And what he did was, he was analyzing the story, short story by Balzac. It's called Saracine. आपको याद है मैंने फोक टेल्स वाला व्लादिमीर प्रॉप के बारे में बताया था, दैट ही रेड सो मेनी folk tales and then came out with certain functions that are there in, you will find in every folk tale. Barthes ने क्या किया, he was reading this story and then he identified 561 units of meaning and he called them lexius. अब 561 पढ़ने तो बड़े मुश्किल हैं. So he proposed that, okay, let's organize these 561 units of meaning into 5 main groups. That, I'm sorry about the background music by my little one. Now he said that let's organize these 561 units of meaning into 5 groups, and he called these 5 groups codes. They are the narrative modes of organizing the units so that meaning is generated. He argued that these codes are common to all narratives. तो जैसे folk tales में हमने देखे थे कि ठीक है इतने कैरेक्टर्स आपको मिलेंगे ही एंड इतने फंक्शंस आपको ये कुछ हैं जो मिलेंगे folk tales में, वैसे ही बार्ट्स ने कहा दैट यू विल फाइंड दीज 5 codes in almost all narratives. So let's look at the 5 codes. First one was Proeretic Code. Proeretic Code, he borrowed it from Claude Levis-Strauss's work on myth. It refers to the code of action and events in the narrative. Basically, Proeretic Code is temporal sequence of a work. It's the most visible aspect of any narrative, and it refers to the sequence कि कहानी जो है वो कैसे खुल रही है, पहले क्या हुआ, फिर क्या हुआ, उसके बाद क्या हुआ. ठीक है, Proeretic Code वही है. आपको हर in every narrative you will find it, the sequence, the temporal sequence of the narrative. That is Proeretic Code. Next is Hermeneutic Code. Hermeneutic Code is actually the questions or the curiosity that you have with the narrative. You know, you read a work and then, or you're watching a movie, let's say. Sometimes what happens, you have these questions in your mind, no? अरे ऐसा क्यों कर दिया? Why did the protagonist do this? You should have done this, not that. That's the curiosity that is generated in your heads. That's the hermeneutic code. ठीक है? The questions that we ask from the narrative. This is the code that informs our interpretation and the questions we ask of the narrative. What happened? Why? When? Who? Who did this? By whom? Like that. Third is cultural code. Cultural code is actually the common knowledge that we all have. Sometimes not everything is given by the author in the text, because the author assumes that there will be a common knowledge of this particular thing that will be there with everybody. For example, let's say when you see a man in white clothes wearing a Gandhi cap, what will you think? You will immediately think that, okay, leave that. That's another. Let's take another example of cultural code. When I say that things were very different during the Raj, I think every Indian will understand what I just said. During the Raj, what does Raj mean? It refers to the British Raj, right? That's the cultural knowledge that we all have. That's the common knowledge that we all have of something. So most Indians would immediately understand the term Raj without any dictionary or without any explanation. So this is the cultural code in the narrative. The common knowledge which is shared by a community. Semic code. This involves the analysis of meanings of individual words and their association or connotations. In simple terms, semic code is actually the stereotypes. अभी जो मैं example दे रही थी वो semic code में actually आना चाहिए. When you see a person wearing a Gandhi cap and you see the person in white kurta pajama, you will immediately think, oh, I think this is a politician. Why? Because this is the stereotype that you associate with Gandhi cap and white kurta pajama. So basically the common set of stereotypes on smaller levels. Clothes को लेके हो गया, और छोटी छोटी चीज़ें जो हमारी सोसाइटी में हैं, दैट इज सीमिक कोड. And the last one is symbolic code, fifth one. Symbols. This is on a larger scale. This is also stereotype only of one kind, but larger stereotypes. जैसे कि you associate darkness with something horror. Let's say there's a horror movie going on and कुछ हो भी नहीं रहा है, कोई भूत नहीं आ रहा है, but you hear that there is darkness and you're hearing that creepy background music. Immediately you're like, oh, something is going to happen, something horror element is going to be shown by the director, whoever. Now that's the symbolic code. The larger cultural myths, you can say. And for example, a horror film thrives on the image of darkness. और भी examples हैं, जैसे कि in a movie there is a shot of a moon. Immediately आप समझ जाओगे, okay, the things that are going to be shown now are of night. और पुरानी movies में आपने देखा है, if they had to show some love scene, they would show two flowers who are like hugging each other. I don't know. That's also kind of a symbolic code. So these are the 5 codes. And अब इन सब codes को आप movies या कोई भी narrative को में डाल के देखो, and you will see that yes, they are there in almost all narratives. The 5 codes. What are they? Proeretic code, hermeneutic code, curiosity, cultural code, the common knowledge, seemic code, the stereotypes, and symbolic code, the larger stereotypes. ठीक है? So this is about Roland Barthes and his codes, or let's say his the structuralist phase of Roland Barthes. I hope this much is clear. I will see you in the next session. Please share this video and it will be of great help if you also subscribe to my channel. Thank you. I'll see you later.